When Meghan Markle sat across from Christiane Amanpour at CNN's studio, everyone expected a thoughtful conversation. Two powerful women discussing truth, media, and legacy. But what began as a poised and professional interview soon became something else entirely. Christiane's calm, incisive questions met Meghan's sharp deflections, and beneath the bright studio lights, respect began to fracture. By the time the cameras stopped rolling, one of them would walk away furious, and the other would walk away applauded. The CNN studio in New York was immaculate. Soft gray walls, gold-trimmed accents, and the steady hum of cameras preparing for another high-profile broadcast. Christiane Amanpour, ever the symbol of composed journalism, reviewed her notes with her trademark precision. Across from her sat Meghan Markle, dressed in an elegant cream blazer and silk blouse, her posture flawless, her expression serene, or perhaps calculatedly so. "Good evening," Christiane began, her tone warm but measured. "Tonight we're joined by Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, an advocate, producer, and former senior royal, to talk about life beyond the palace, her projects, and the global conversations she continues to inspire." Meghan smiled, nodding gently. "Thank you, Christiane. It's good to be here to talk about what really matters." The opening minutes were smooth. Meghan spoke confidently about her foundation, her podcast, her work on women's rights. The camera loved her, as always. Her answers were practiced, but polished, every phrase wrapped in precision and poise. Christiane listened, occasionally interjecting with genuine curiosity. But beneath the civility, there was tension, the kind that only seasoned interviewers recognize. Christiane noticed the subtle rigidity in Meghan's shoulders, the faint defensiveness in her tone whenever a question brushed close to controversy. "So," Christiane said, turning a page in her notes, "you've often spoken about finding freedom, leaving behind one of the most traditional institutions in modern history. Looking back now, do you feel you truly found that freedom?" Meghan's smile didn't falter, but her eyes narrowed just slightly. "I think freedom is a personal thing," she replied, her tone airy but edged. "It's not about where you live or what you leave behind. It's about living your truth, something I've done consistently, despite how the media has tried to twist it." Christiane nodded calmly. "You mentioned the media, and I have to ask, do you believe that coverage has been unfair or simply uncomfortable?" Meghan let out a short laugh, one that didn't quite sound amused. "Well, Christiane, I think there's a difference between discomfort and deliberate cruelty. Most of what's been written about me wasn't journalism. It was harassment with better grammar." The studio was silent for a moment. Even the crew behind the cameras glanced up. Christiane remained composed, but there was a flicker of intrigue behind her eyes. "I see," she said softly. "And yet, some critics argue that you've used the media just as effectively, through documentaries, interviews, memoirs. Would you say that's fair?" This time, Meghan's smile disappeared. "Critics love to use the word media when a woman tells her own story. When a man does it, it's called leadership." The remark landed like a stone dropped into still water. Christiane gave a small nod, unfazed. "Fair point," she said, "but surely you understand why people might see contradiction in advocating for privacy while maintaining such a public platform." Meghan crossed one leg over the other, her tone cool. "Privacy isn't isolation. It's control, the right to decide what to share, when to share it, and with whom. I think people struggle with that concept because they're used to consuming others, not respecting them." Christiane's eyes stayed fixed on Meghan. There was something magnetic about her defiance, polished yet simmering with resentment. "That's an interesting distinction," Christiane said carefully. "But do you ever worry that the public might interpret your version of privacy as selective transparency?" Meghan's expression hardened. "People can interpret whatever they want. They usually do." A faint, uncomfortable pause followed, the kind that happens when truth gives way to tension. Meghan adjusted the cuff of her blazer, the corners of her mouth lifting into a polite, almost mocking smile. Christiane didn't miss a beat. Her voice was still calm, but the edge of inquiry had sharpened. "Let's talk about your husband, Prince Harry. The two of you have been described as one of the most talked about couples in the world. How do you balance the attention, The constant scrutiny. Meghan's eyes flicked toward the camera before returning to Christiane. It's simple, she said smoothly. We don't read the nonsense. We live our lives. People project onto us what they want. We've stopped caring. Christiane smiled faintly. That sounds peaceful. It is, Meghan replied, then after a pause. Peace is what happens when you stop needing approval from people who never liked you to begin with. The words hung in the air, eloquent, defensive, and just a touch bitter. For the first time, Christiane leaned slightly forward. Do you think that detachment has come at a cost, personally or professionally? Meghan's tone sharpened. You mean, have I lost fans? No, Christiane, I've lost noise. And that's not a wasage, it's liberation. The control room fell into hushed stillness. The interview was only 20 minutes in and the temperature was already dropping. Christiane made a small note on her card, her face revealing nothing. She'd been in war zones and political crises. She knew the sound of a battle line being drawn. And in that CNN studio, one had just been drawn between two women, one who asked questions and one who refused to be questioned. The second half of the interview began after a brief commercial break. The lights seemed brighter now, almost too bright, the studio colder. Meghan adjusted her earpiece, offered a polite smile to the crew, and leaned back in her chair. Christiane Amanpour returned with that signature calm, the kind that could disarm a president but never promised comfort. Welcome back, Christiane said softly. We're continuing our conversation with Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, about life, identity, and the public eye. Meghan returned the smile poised as ever. Thank you, Christiane. I hope we can continue the conversation. Part of that, Christiane gave a small laugh. Of course, I promise. I'm not here to cross-examine you. The tone was light, but the tension beneath it was unmistakable. Christiane began gently. You've spoken about redefining your role, not just as a public figure, but as a woman navigating power, privilege, and perception. Do you feel misunderstood? Meghan folded her hands on her lap. Constantly, she said, people love to create narratives. The irony is, I've spent my life working in storytelling, but the moment I tell mine, it's called manipulation. Christiane nodded thoughtfully. That's interesting. You frame narrative as both power and burden. I think that's what happens when you're a woman who doesn't fit into neat boxes, Meghan replied smoothly. People can't decide whether to admire you or destroy you. There was a ripple of quiet in the studio, the kind that followed one of Meghan's perfectly sharpened lines. Christiane let it hang for a moment before shifting forward. Still, she said softly, you've been accused, fairly or unfairly, of being calculating. Some say your every move seems rehearsed. Meghan's smile didn't move, but her tone chilled by a few degrees. I find that fascinating, Christiane. Men call it strategy. When women do it, it's deceit. But perhaps you've noticed that pattern yourself. Christiane's eyes narrowed just slightly. Not with offense, but interest. I've noticed patterns everywhere, she said, voice steady. But patterns often reveal truth, don't they? I think they reveal bias, Meghan said crisply. People see what they want to confirm. Christiane nodded slowly. Then what's the truth, Meghan? Not the documentary, not the headlines. Your truth. For the first time, Meghan hesitated. It wasn't a pause for reflection. It was the silence of calculation. The truth, she said finally, is that I've had to build peace in a world addicted to my pain. The words were elegant, poetic even, but Christiane didn't blink. And yet, she said carefully, you've chosen to stay visible. The world didn't force you into the spotlight. You've kept the cameras close. Meghan's lips parted slightly, her composure slipping for a fraction of a second. I use my voice. That's not the same as seeking attention. Christiane leaned in just a little. You believe that distinction is clear to your audience? I don't owe clarity to people committed to misunderstanding me. Meghan shot back. There it was, the first crack. Meghan's tone was still calm, but her control had started to fray. Christiane, ever composed, pressed on gently, her words precise and surgical. Let's talk about your time in the UK, she said. You've spoken about feeling unsupported, even unsafe. But critics, especially within Britain, argue that the monarchy gave you one of the biggest global platforms in modern history. How do you respond to that? Meghan's eyes flickered. She didn't like the phrasing. That's an interesting way to frame it, she said, as though opportunity erases harm. That's like saying a woman can't speak about harassment if she got promoted. Christiane tilted her head slightly. So you view your experience as systemic mistreatment? I view it as survival, Meghan said. You can decorate a cage all you want. It's still a cage. The control room was silent. Meghan's voice had taken on a steady rhythm now, the same cadence that carried her through speeches and televised specials. But this was no keynote address. Christiane's questions were scalpel sharp, and for every polished answer, she cut a little closer. You mentioned before that freedom is control, Christiane said. But isn't control just another kind of confinement? Meghan's smile vanished completely. No, she said, firm now. Control is dignity. And I refuse to apologize for having mine. Christiane nodded, scribbling a quick note. Let's talk about dignity, then. You've built a platform on compassion, empathy, empowerment, yet some former staff members, and even colleagues, have described your leadership style as difficult. The air froze, Meghan's eyes narrowed. Difficult? Christiane's tone stayed even. Yes, demanding, cold, unyielding. Those were the words used. Meghan let out a short, incredulous laugh. And I assume they're all anonymous? Christiane hesitated for just a second, enough for Meghan to seize on it. There's always someone hiding behind a source, Meghan continued, her voice growing colder. You'd think after decades in journalism, you'd know better than to quote gossip. Christiane smiled faintly, a professional smile. Anonymous or not, perception often tells its own story. Then perhaps you should ask why powerful women are always described as difficult when they refuse to be controlled. Meghan snapped. If I were a man, you'd call me decisive. Christiane didn't flinch. Some might, she said softly. Others might just call it arrogance. A hush fell over the studio. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop. Meghan blinked once, twice, her composure cracking visibly for the first time. I beg your pardon, she asked, her voice icy. Christiane set her pen down. You speak about compassion, yet dismiss every question that challenges you as bias or gossip. Confidence and condescension can look similar on camera, Meghan. The difference is how people leave feeling afterward. Meghan's face tightened. I didn't come here to be insulted. And I didn't come here to be rehearsed, Christiane replied. You're eloquent, but the world isn't looking for another performance. They're looking for sincerity. For a moment, the only sound in the studio was the faint hum of the lights. Meghan's hands clenched subtly on her lap. When she spoke again, her tone was lower, controlled, but sharp enough to cut glass. Sincerity doesn't need your approval, she said. No, Christiane agreed quietly, but accountability does. The red tally light on the main camera glowed brighter than ever. Two women sat in silence, one seething, the other composed, both knowing the polite portion of the interview had officially ended, and the next segment would decide who walked away looking stronger. The third segment began with a subtle shift in energy. The studio's lights seemed harsher now, the hum of the equipment louder than before. Meghan sat perfectly still, her hands folded, expression poised, yet her eyes told a different story. They were cold, calculating, expectant. Christiane Amanpour returned from the break with the same unshakable professionalism that had carried her through interviews with presidents and revolutionaries alike. Welcome back, she began softly. We're continuing our conversation with Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. We've discussed the challenges of visibility in the pursuit of personal freedom. I'd like to talk now about legacy. Meghan tilted her head slightly, her smile reappearing, faint and rehearsed. Legacy, she repeated. That's always the word people use when they're trying to define someone else's life, isn't it? Christiane smiled gently. Sometimes. But you've built a global platform, Meghan. Surely you've thought about what you want that legacy to be. I want it to be truth, Meghan replied quickly. Authenticity. I want people to see that I never compromised who I am, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. Christiane nodded. And yet, she said, many people feel you've become more distant, guarded, even hostile Towards the same press you once used to amplify your message. Meghan's tone hardened. I didn't use the press, Christiane. I spoke my truth. The press used me. I see, Christiane said. And do you believe there's been no middle ground? No shared responsibility in how things unfolded? Meghan gave a short laugh that didn't sound amused. You mean am I to blame for the way the British tabloids treated me? For the racial abuse, the harassment, the lies? Is that what you're implying? Christiane held her ground, voice even. I'm implying that fame and influence are complicated, that every story has more than one perspective. Well, Meghan said sharply, mine happens to be the one that's true. The silence that followed was taut, electric. Even the cameraman hesitated before readjusting focus. Christiane spoke carefully. You mentioned truth. I'd like to ask about your relationship with the royal family. Specifically, whether any bridges can still be rebuilt. Have you had contact with Prince William or the Princess of Wales since the Queen's passing? Meghan's jaw tightened. I don't discuss family matters publicly. But you have. In interviews, documentaries, your memoir. That was context, Meghan interrupted, her tone clipped. There's a difference between setting the record straight and feeding a gossip machine. Christiane's calm didn't waver. Still, people are curious whether reconciliation is possible. Meghan smiled faintly, but her words were ice. People are always curious when a woman walks away from something toxic. They call it forgiveness when they want the drama to continue. I call it peace when I don't go back. Christiane leaned back slightly, thoughtful. So no reconciliation then? No need for one, Meghan replied. It was the kind of statement that could fill tabloids for weeks. Christiane glanced briefly toward her notes, then looked up again. And your husband, Prince Harry, how has he handled the distance from his family? He's fine, Meghan said. Thriving, actually. We're building a life that's grounded, healthy, happy. Not everyone can say that. Christiane nodded slowly. He's spoken about the impact of his mother's passing and how it shaped his distrust of the media. Would you say you share that distrust? Or perhaps fuel it? For a moment, Meghan's composure faltered. Her lips parted, her eyes narrowing. Fuel it? She repeated. You make it sound like it's a fire he didn't light himself. I didn't mean it that way, Christiane said softly. But that's how it sounds, Meghan replied. People love to paint me as manipulative. The woman behind the curtain, pulling emotional strings. It's lazy, sexist, and frankly beneath a journalist of your reputation. Christiane sat perfectly still. Her voice, when she spoke again, was low and calm, but carried the unmistakable weight of authority. I think my reputation allows me to ask difficult questions, Meghan. You've built a brand around speaking your truth. Surely that means being open to scrutiny? Meghan's laugh was short and sharp. Scrutiny and interrogation are not the same thing. Neither, Christiane said evenly, is sincerity and performance. The air went still. Meghan's smile disappeared entirely now. Her expression hardened, eyes flashing with disbelief. Excuse me? Christiane leaned forward slightly, maintaining steady eye contact. You speak eloquently about empathy and integrity, but every answer feels rehearsed, defensive. If your truth is as authentic as you say, why does it sound so carefully curated? For a split second, Meghan looked stunned. Then she composed herself, her tone dropping to a quiet, dangerous calm. Because Christiane, when you've been attacked for years, you learn to choose your words carefully. Some of us don't have the privilege of stumbling through our truth. Christiane's pen hovered above her notebook. Then she slowly set it down. That's fair, she said. But truth, real truth, doesn't always need perfect phrasing. Meghan's voice sharpened. Maybe that's why you're asking questions instead of answering them. A murmur rippled across the crew. Christiane remained motionless. Her stillness made the tension worse, a calm sea before a storm. Meghan, she said softly, you came here to talk about your journey. But every question seems to offend you. Every topic becomes an attack. Why is that? Meghan leaned back, crossing her arms. Maybe because you're not listening, Christiane. Maybe because you're too busy trying to corner me. I'm not trying to corner you, Christiane replied, her patience thinning. I'm trying to understand you. Then maybe you should start by respecting me, Meghan snapped. Christiane's eyes darkened slightly. Respect, she said quietly, isn't blind agreement. The silence that followed was suffocating. Meghan's breathing quickened, her jaw tight, eyes locked on Christiane with visible hostility. For the first time in her career, Christiane Amanpour looked almost weary. She glanced briefly toward the control room, a silent signal that this interview was spiraling beyond recovery. And as the seconds passed, it became clear that neither woman was willing to back down. The final act was coming, and the cameras were still rolling. The atmosphere inside the CNN studio had become suffocating. The polite restraint of the earlier moments had dissolved into something far more volatile. Meghan sat upright, her jaw set, eyes burning with quiet indignation. Christiane Amanpour, ever composed, was now leaning forward slightly, her expression that of a journalist who had reached the limit of patience, not out of anger, but principle. "Let's continue," Christiane said calmly, though her tone had cooled. "You've spoken at length about compassion and empowerment, Meghan. But when compassion is tested, when people disagree or challenge you, what happens then? Does it vanish?" Meghan gave a tight smile. "No, Christiane. Compassion isn't about agreeing with everyone. It's about boundaries. And I think people in your profession could stand to learn more about those." Christiane nodded once, pen poised but motionless. "Boundaries are important," she said, "but so is accountability. When millions listen to your voice, don't you think you owe them honesty, even when it's uncomfortable?" "I am honest," Meghan said sharply. "I just don't owe my vulnerability to every camera that points at me." Christiane's voice softened, but there was steel behind it. "Then why keep sitting in front of them?" That question landed like a blow. The crew froze, the studio fell utterly silent. Meghan blinked, clearly taken aback, and for the first time, her polished confidence cracked. "I'm here because I have something to say," she replied, her tone rising slightly. "Not because I owe explanations to journalists who twist every word." Christiane didn't move. "I've spent my career covering wars, revolutions, human rights violations. I don't twist words, Meghan. I clarify them. There's a difference." "Oh, please," Meghan said with a short, humorless laugh. "Don't try to turn this into some noble crusade. This isn't about journalism, it's about entertainment. You want your headline, don't you?" Meghan lashes out. "Go ahead. That's what you came for." Christiane remained seated, her tone measured but now edged with fatigue. "No, Meghan. I came for truth. But it seems every time truth walks toward you, you call it an attack." The words hit harder than either expected. Meghan's lips parted slightly, her eyes flashed. "How dare you?" she said quietly. "You don't know what I've lived through." "You're right," Christiane said softly. "I don't. But I've interviewed people who've survived far worse, and they did so without weaponizing their pain." That did it. Meghan's composure shattered. "Weaponizing," she repeated, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea what it's like to have your every move dissected, your motives questioned, your existence turned into gossip?" "I do," Christiane replied. "It's called public life. It comes with power, and power comes with scrutiny." "That's not oppression, Meghan. That's consequence." The silence that followed was like a storm holding its breath. Meghan's knuckles tightened around the armrest. She took a slow breath through her nose and stood up abruptly. "I don't need to sit here and be lectured by someone who thinks empathy is a debate tactic," she said. Christiane stayed seated, her voice calm, deliberate. "No one's lecturing you. But perhaps for once someone's not afraid to tell you what others won't, that not every disagreement is cruelty, and not every question is an attack." Meghan shook her head, disbelief flashing across her face. "You know what, Christiane? I expected better, but clearly this isn't a conversation, it's an ambush." She reached for her lapel mic and unclipped it with a sharp motion. The sound of the static in her microphone filled the studio. Christiane folded her hands on the table, her composure unshaken. "If you walk away now," she said quietly, "that tells the world more than any answer could." Meghan froze for a moment, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes, then turned sharply toward the exit. Her heels struck the floor with crisp precision, echoing through the empty set. The doors closed behind her, leaving an almost tangible silence. The crew looked to Christiane, unsure whether to cut to black or continue rolling. Christiane exhaled slowly, then straightened her notes. She looked directly into the main camera. To our viewers, she began softly, I want to say that sometimes conversations don't go the way we intend. But that's the nature of truth. It's uncomfortable, it's imperfect, and it doesn't wait for permission. Her voice steadied, her eyes calm but weary. What you just saw wasn't about winning or losing. It was about the cost of living in a world where honesty and image collide. We thank our guest for her time. The red tally light faded to black. The crew exhaled collectively. And in the stillness that followed, there was an unspoken understanding. Another headline was already being written, another viral clip already taking shape. What did you think of that tense showdown between Meghan Markle and Christiane Amanpour? Do you think Meghan was right to walk away? Or did Christiane finally ask the questions no one else dared? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below, hit like and subscribe for more unbelievable real-life interviews that spiral out of control. Only here, where the truth is never simple.